Well, howdy, Hoota Thunkers. This is the host of the Hoota Thunker podcast, Zeb, coming at you for episode 100. I thought I'd do a video version of the podcast. Probably won't make it as long as the audio version, just because I'm using my work computer, and I think they track how if you put really big uploads up on the internet. But anyway, we're going to talk about this here. This episode is about Khutulun, warrior princess of the moon. And like I said, announcement, episode 100. I really wanted to get this milestone, 100 episodes, awesome. So first, I want to go over the recommendation segment. I recommend you play a board game. It's called Settlers of Catan. It's awesome. I've been playing Catan for years now, and it's really fun to play with your friends because while the rule set is awesome and a lot of people sort of compare it to Monopoly, the great thing about Catan is you can barter, trade, negotiate, form alliances, form deadly enemies. It's great. It's about 4 people play. You can get expansion packs to go farther, but with 4 people, it's probably the best. And you're these settlers trying to settle an island, trying to conquer. The first one to get a certain amount of victory points wins, and you can play with some beers, you can play with some music, talk throughout it. It's not something that takes all of your focus. It's really fun. It includes dice and cards, so really fun. The board game itself is like $40-$50, which is a lot, I agree, but usually you can find a friend who has it. You don't have to have it yourself. Also, you can download on your phone. I'm pretty sure that does cost money, but it's like $10 for a one-time fee. It's not like a subscription or anything, so check that out as well. And I think they just came out with a VR version, which I do have VR headset, but I don't know if I do Catan. I just prefer the board game. It's not that hard to set it up. Anyway, play Settlers of Catan. You won't regret it. Crack a few brews, grab a few friends, play Catan. Now for the main event. This week's episode is about a warrior princess named Khutulun, spelled Khutulun. But you probably know that because it's probably in the title of this video. So you'd know how to spell it. In order to tell Khutulun's story, we must talk about Genghis Khan. Little dude you might heard of. He was born somewhere between 1158 and 1162 and died on August 18th of 1227. His birth name was Temujin, and he was the founder and first Great Khan Emperor, Great Khan of the Emperor of the Mongol Empire, which became the largest contiguous empire in history after his death. It's like the biggest land-connected empire ever. It's insane if you look at it on a map. He came to power uniting many of the nomadic tribes of the Northeast Asia, and after being proclaimed the universal ruler of the Mongols, or Genghis Khan, that's what that means, he launched the Mongol invasions, which ultimately conquered most of Eurasia, reaching as far west as Poland and as far south as Egypt. His major campaigns included those against the Korokatai, the Chinese dynasties. His generals conducted farther raids in medieval Georgia and the Kiev Rus and the Volga, Bulgaria. So, Genghis was one of, if not the toughest, brutal, and all-around badasses to be remembered throughout the ages, and he's been around for a very long time. Now, that is enough about Genghis Khan. This week's episode is not about him, but it is important to talk about him. The man deserves his own Thunk It episode. I had to mention him because he's the ancestor to who I'm really going to be talking about today, Khutulun, warrior princess of the moon. Now, the way Genghis raised his children, the culture and empire that he forged directly affected how Khutulun became who she became, the person she became, the badass that she was. After Genghis died in 1227 AD, his empire continued to expand and conquer, but that didn't last forever. It fizzled out quite quickly after his death. Not super quickly, generations, but not as quickly as Alexander the Great or Attila the Hun, but in similar fashion. Their leader died, and things sort of crumbled after a while. All those testosterone-fueled alpha males and those characters in the Genghis Khan's empire started to turn their direction towards each other when they started running out of people to fight once they conquered like 80% of the known world. And then it started to turn into civil war. This is where Khutulun comes along. Khutulun is known by several names. Khutulun, it's Ayurug, or the Ajaruk, whatever, I don't know how to pronounce it. All of those names, though, refer to some form of Moonlight, which I think is a really cool name. I want to name my kid Moonlight. Or not Moonlight itself, but like some ancient name that means moonlight. That's pretty badass. Khutulun, warrior princess of the Moonlight, or the princess of 10,000 horses, was Genghis' great-great-granddaughter. But have no fear. This badass B-word has a story that's compelling all on her own. She's her own woman. What we know about Khutulun today is mainly because of 2 historians. Marco Polo, he carried his story from Europe, and then Rashid al-Din Hamadani spread his story in Persia. So it's always good to have a character, if you have at least two historians to talk about them, because then you can compare. When two people from two different cultures who haven't, crossed their notes talk about the same person and say the same thing, then today's historians go, yeah, that probably actually happened when two completely different sources. If it's just one person, they have biases, they might want to change the story for whatever reason, but Marco Polo and Rashid al-Din, they both said that a lot of the same things about Khutulun, so we take that as truth. And Marco Polo, probably heard about him. He revolutionized one of the greatest pool games in history, where one player closes their eyes, says Marco, and everyone else in the pool with their eyes open get to say Polo, and you have to find them and play tag in the pool. That's what he's most known for. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. It's such a weird game. But Marco Polo is one of the greatest adventurers and historians, and there's a Netflix came out with the original series called Marco Polo, and it's about his time with the Mongols. Great show. I don't know why they canceled it after one season. It really was really cool. I think it was maybe budgets. It was really expensive, but the one season was great. It's really fun to watch. I loved it. I'm a total Mongol fan, total nerd for Mongolian culture, and that's a great show. Probably one of the greatest shows to watch about Mongolian culture. So, now, by the time Khutulun was born in 1260, her great-great-grandfather's empire was already on shaky ground. The writing was on the wall, civil war's coming, and it's going to tear our empire apart. People were already seeing it. She was born in 1260, Genghis Khan died in 1227. So it has lasted a couple of decades. It's still going, but it's starting to fall apart. To summarize what was going on, what the inner fighting was in the Mongol Empire at the time, you had Khans like Khutulun's father, Kaidu, who liked doing stuff like smacking skulls and conquering the known world and riding his horse and his steed with the wind in his hair and a bow and arrow. That's what he wanted to do, and get drunk and wrestle and fight. The life of a nomad G right there. That was Kaidu. Total badass. That's probably where Khutulun got it from. However, there's other Khans, like Kublai Khan, which you probably have heard of. They've even said Kublai Khan. I'm pretty sure they've said the name Kublai Khan in South Park. I know there's like 25 seasons, but they're bound to say almost every name. But Kublai Khan is mentioned in stuff like South Park. He's all over the place. He was pretty awesome. He was more interested in ruling with politics and what's that called? Ambassadorsness, where he goes over and he talks to the Chinese and he's like, why don't we rule our people this way with a little bit more finesse? And then Kaidu's like, what are you doing, man? We're Mongols. We crack skulls, and they do what we tell them to do. So there was that infighting right there. Most sources say Kublai was Kaidu's cousin, but some say Kublai was Kaidu's uncle. I don't know. Regardless, they're related and they're rivals. Kaidu and the old school Khan started a 30-year-long war with Kublai and his people. During this war, Kaidu had an ace of a warrior through his battles, and he kept at his back pocket during his toughest battles. It wasn't any of his 14 sons, no, it was his ultra badass, ass-kicking daughter, Khutulun. Khutulun was like Kaidu's heat-seeking missile in the battlefield. What she would do is just go out there, pluck a dude, and be like, oh, you're mine now. I'll let Marco Polo say it. Quote, sometimes she would quit her father's side and make a dash at the host of the enemy and seize some man thereout as deftly as a hawk pounces upon a bird and carry him to her father, and this she did many a time. That's how Marco Polo said it. Can you imagine that? You're just at a huge Mongol battle, there's mud, there's swords and axes and pikes, and all of a sudden there's a chick on her horse and she's like, yeah, she just goes out into the fray, picks a dude up. He's like, what? He just picks him up, brings him back. He's like, Dad, look what I got a warrior. Check this out. So she would just leave the protection of the Khan's side, where she was probably safe, back with the leaders, charge right into battle, and capture a high-priority target, or just some random dude, on the enemy's side, and bring him back to her own side and interrogate him or whatever. Just be like, look what I found. The greatest strategic benefit that this had on the battlefield was to boost morale for her allies and terrify the enemy. It was, also cemented her reputation for being a total badass B-word. She wasn't very strategic in being like, okay, we need to move this flank over here. She didn't do that, but she did boost morale, and that was helpful. To get a better idea of Mongolian culture, it's important to point out that Khutulun's abilities were unusual but not unique. So her going out there and plucking people, that's crazy. But when we think, usually Western people, we think of medieval warfare, we don't think women, which is accurate to our culture, our ancestors. But because Mongols didn't fight like our ancestors in the West, they use horseback and bow. Women are pretty good at that. they're usually lighter. They can ride faster like jockeys. They can do it at bow and arrow just as good. Yes, it takes strength to pull back a bow, but it usually muscle memory and skill are a lot more powerful with a bow and arrow than it is with a sword or an axe. Like if you have no training with a sword or an axe, you can still kill somebody. If you're a strong dude, you just whack. Women aren't as strong typically overall. I know there's plenty of women out there way stronger than me. I know, but I'm just talking overall. Women typically don't have as much strength, so they're not as good with swords and axes and stuff like that, but they're just as badass with a bow and arrow and horses, and that's how the Mongols fought. So, Khutulun, the way she did things was unusual, just going plucking a dude. But to have a woman on the battlefield, that's not unique, not in the Mongol war, which is, pretty progressive, I guess, but Genghis is like, I don't care if you're a woman or a dude, get out there and kill people for me, do it. Khutulun's ability on the battlefield impressed not just Marco Polo, but her dad, too. Her dad was quoted saying that her abilities, quote, most pleased by her abilities. That's what he said. That's the quote. Not a man of words, that Kaidu, that old school nomadic G. I'm most pleased with your abilities. Great. I don't know. I saw that quote pop up a couple of times. I'm like, why would people even quote that? I guess it's like one of the only things you heard Kaidu saying or whatever, but it's like, wow, so poetic. I am most pleased. Okay, great. Now, it wasn't just about her battle prowess. She also had this athletic ability, and when you were athletically victorious, you carried a lot of strong, sacred essence, and the champion of athleticism in Mongol culture thought that you were blessed by the spirit. So you were something special if you were good at sports. And Mongols loved to wrestle each other. They placed bets on the outcome and got loaded on alcohol while they did so. Wrestling was a major part of their culture and celebrations. Unlike the Emperor Kublai Khan, who enjoyed the luxury of the Chinese court, eating their version of caviar and banging his harem or whatever, just living in silk and stuff. Khutulun rejected that. Temptations of sedentary civilization. She didn't go and get civilized. She was an untamable beast. She sought to maintain the hardy Mongolian way of life. She was a large and powerful built woman, and she used her size and strength in the three Mongol sports of horsemanship, archery, and wrestling. She's good at all of them, as well as in the primary Mongol vocation of warfare. The Mongols! So, Mongols are crazy. In this time and period, in this culture, there was no weight classes, no kind of division of gender. Anyone could wrestle anyone. I could wrestle a chick could wrestle a chick, dude could wrestle dude, but just whoever. On top of that, there's no, set boundary. There's no boundary to their wrestling matches. It could go wherever it goes. It's sort of like a backyard brawl. If you run into a car, you just keep fighting. There's no boundary. It's not like, oh, you step out of bounds. Nope. Also, no fight clock. Nobody cares how long it takes. Sometimes it took days in certain reports. Wrestling for days until one just gave out. And here's how they did it. Like the two opponents, they grabbed each other's arms or waist until one forced the other to the ground. If any part of the body, other than the feet, touched the ground, like your knees, your elbows, your back, your head, whatever, it was over. Even for a brief amount of time, it was over. Sometimes the idea was to just throw them real quick. Other times, real big dudes would just lock and just try to push each other as much and wear them out. So bull elephants, that they would just go at it for a really long time till they wore each other out until one of them dropped. This is the environment Khutulun was competing in. She went up against warriors from the largest empire at the time, known for being huge, for being scary, for being brutal dudes. That's who she was going up against. The opponents she faced were all shapes and sizes. Gigantic Mongolian dudes, like you watch the Mulan movie, the way they animate them, there's freakishly large dudes. That's who she's fighting. She never lost. She was undefeated. She never lost to one of these Mongol dudes. Now, how do we know that's true, that she was undefeated? Because the historians say it. Multiple historians say she would do this thing where she was like, oh, her parents want her to get married. She's like, I'll get married if you put me up against a guy and he beats me in wrestling. Then I'll marry him. But if I beat him, he's got to give me some horses. That's how she got her title of the 10,000 Princess of the 10,000 Horses, which is a really cool title. Also, Warrior Princess of the Moonlight, also pretty dope. I kind of came up with that one on my own, the Warrior Princess of the Moonlight. I just mixed some things. But the Princess of 10,000 Horses, I'm not the first one to say that. That's freaking cool. And that's what she did. She would say, okay, I'll beat this dude. He's got to give me, or they would wager, I'll wager 100 horses. She's like, all right, I'll fight you. 100 more horses in her herd. I'll wager 10. There's 10 more. And it just went on until they said she had like 10,000. Now, for them, 10,000 wasn't an actual 10,000. It's sort of the way, like, today we'd be like, it was like a bagillion horses. It's when you want to hyperbolize something. So to them, it's more like, more horses than I could count. But they did put her herd up against the emperor's herd, and they rivaled each other. They're about the same size. So she did have a buttload of horses. There was this one time that a dude came up and wagered, I'll wager 1,000 horses, milady, if you'll take me as your husband, or if I can take you as my bride. I guess, I don't know, making that up. But he wagered 10,000 horses. And they're like, oh, snap, that's the most anyone's ever wagered. And apparently this guy was good looking, he was nice, her parents really liked him. She even kind of liked him. She's like, this dude is strong, he's pretty cool. And she did agree to throw the match, because she's like, this dude's pretty cool, my parents really want me to get married. Maybe this is the time. I've already beaten all these other dudes, I have plenty of horses. And, you know, maybe I'll throw the match. And she did agree to it. But as she walked into the ring, she was like, I can't throw a match. I gotta get at it. I gotta win. So she gets in there and she finds out this dude's strong as hell. It's one of the most toughest dudes she's ever gone up against. But she doesn't care. She struggles forever. It lasted so long, like the whole day. And in the end, she beat him. She pushed that dude to the ground. She beat him anyway and was like, yes! She threw him to the ground. Not only did she defeat him, but she humiliated him. He disappeared. He just left. He's gone. In history, he showed up, fought her, lost, and just left. He did leave behind 1,000 more horses to add to her herd, though, which was really cool. So, but it was also sad. They were like, well, that's probably the best chance of getting a really cool husband. Gone out the door. It wasn't until her unmarrying ways started to bring rumors and shame upon her family that she agreed to get hitched. So what happened basically was, she and her family's beating all these battles, kicking ass. She's getting all these horses. She's loving it. But then rumors start to spread. Their enemies start to say, like, oh, I wonder why she's not getting married. Oh, they start thinking. Rumor came up that she was having an incestuous relationship with her dad. Now, all the historians did point to the fact that, like, this is unfounded. Where is this coming from? But it was bringing bad reputation and negatively affecting her dad, her family, her legacy. So she agreed to get married. She married this dude. We don't know who he is. Don't have a name. A couple of different sources say he was from here, he was from there. We don't know. But she agreed to marry him. But not after he beat her in wrestling. That didn't happen. She just agreed to marry him. No wrestling match. She's still undefeated. No man has ever beat her in wrestling. No woman either that we know of. So she agreed to get married, and I guess it was kind of a boring marriage. So not much else about that guy. I love that. Khutulun, we know. She's awesome. She's badass. Her husband... No idea what his name was. No idea where he came from. Khutulun's dad, Kaidu, had known for some time. At this point, it's coming down. She's married. He's like, I want Khutulun to take over. I want her to be my successor. But that didn't happen, unfortunately. It would have been badass. We had a female Khan. I mean, that would have been awesome. I don't know if, a lot of people were up in arms against it. Even though Khutulun was his number one advisor and political support and gave him advice, and she was by all means, was probably be a great leader, but they just weren't happening. The other Mongols. Unsure if it's because she's a woman that they're like, no, we can't have a woman rule us. I want to think that. I didn't read it anywhere, so I don't know. What we do know is that one of the main factors that stops her from being a leader was her brothers. Not all 14 of them. There's one dude who was on her side. His name is Oris, but we'll get to that. 13 of her brothers were like, no. They campaigned against her. They were getting greedy. They're like, I want some of Dad's power. Why does Khutulun get it? That's unfair. But in the end, that's not what happened. It's really sad that this is how the Mongols became. They became greedy over with their birthright, because really what made Genghis Khan's empire so great and powerful, when Genghis Khan was alive, he made sure promotions within his military ranks and other facets of this empire were not based on nepotism. Nepotism is basically promoting someone based on that you know them. They're your friend, or they're your family, they're your brother-in-law, whatever. No. He said, if you're going to promote someone, it's solely going to be based on your merit, how good you are at the job. And to us, that sounds pretty common. You get promoted because you're good at it. But back then, it was unheard of. You promoted people because they were your son, they were your friend. That's why you promoted people. That was normal back then. Genghis is like, nah, I want the most capable army I can think of. I'll promote my enemies who I've I'll promote prisoners. I'll promote slaves if they look like total badasses in warfare. And that's what made him so powerful. One of the things, I mean, there's a lot of things, but that was revolutionary. The dude was smart. things like this made it that way. It's just sad that his descendants mucked all that up with their petty claims to power based on their birthright, because it goes against what their great-great-granddad made their empire so powerful with. In the end, none of Kaidu's sons became Khan, which I kind of like that. They were ruining it. They didn't become Khan at all. The title of Great Khan was given to a member of the rival clan named Dua, who was also related as like a cousin or something. Unfortunately, this is where Khutulun's story slides into the dark pit of historical obscurity. Not much is known after that. We know that she died 5 years after her dad died. When Kaidu died, her dad, in 1301, Khutulun guarded his tomb with the assistance of her one brother, Oris. They were up against it, but was challenged by the other brothers, including Chapar and the relative Dua, because she resisted their succession. The year of her death is 1306. No idea how she died. She just died. It wasn't long after that the nomadic clans of the Mongol Empire began to separate and lose all semblance of a cohesive power. So, sad, that's how it happened. When Khutulun died and the great empire she once belonged to started to wither, history nearly forgot about her altogether. Almost forgot. But the power of storytelling kept her legend alive. That's why we know about her now. 1710, a French Orientalist by the name Francois Petit de la Croix wrote I can pronounce that correctly, I have a French minor, thank you. Wrote a story titled Turandot. It's translates to Turkish daughter. It was loosely based on Khutulun's life, but details were changed to fit what a European man's image of a strong woman might be. He couldn't imagine a woman wrestling, so that's not how he wrote it. Instead of challenging her suitors to wrestling matches like Khutulun, real-life Khutulun, Turandot, Petit de la Croix's character, gave them riddles, and if they failed to solve her riddles, then they were executed. Okay, I kind of see how that would be a cool story, but it's not the badass Khutulun. It's different, And then in the 20th century, Francois Petit de la Croix's story was adapted into an Italian opera. However, this opera screwed her story up even more. It was warped even farther from Khutulun's actual history. In the opera, Turandot was a no-nonsense kind of princess. She's like, She was a sassy, kind of angry princess. But she finally gave in to love, and it made her happy and made her complete. And that's how it ended, happily ever after. Ew! Khutulun's story's not about that. Khutulun's story is kind of tragic, but also badass. She forged her way. She didn't back down until the day she died. It's not about, she found a man and now she's complete. No, that's annoying. I hate that. That's what the West did to it. But while the West they have totally rewritten history with its recasting of Khutulun into Turandot, Mongolia today continues to honor Khutulun's actual story to this day. Since 1206, when Genghis Khan founded the Mongol Empire, they've had this annual games of the Nadam Games, and wrestling's in there. When they wrestle, they wear these vests. It's a very particular vest with really long sleeves. They have no shoulders, and the chest is completely open. You can see the man's nipples and everything. It's basically to show that they know that their opponent is a male. They're not afraid, but they want to make sure they're not fighting a female, not because I don't want to beat up women. It's more like, I got to make sure that's not some Khutulun badass trying to kick my ass. At the end of each match, the winner stretches out his arms to display his chest, and he slowly waves his arms in the air like a bird, turning for all to see. For the winner, it is a victory dance. They're like, yes, I won. But it's also a tribute to one of the greatest wrestlers in Mongolian history, the warrior princess Khutulun. And that's why they wear that. It's a tribute to her. And nowadays, in the 13th century and since then, men only wrestle men. They don't wrestle women. You could look at that as a bad thing, like, why don't they let women wrestle? But I choose to be like, Khutulun whoops so much ass over there that the men are scared to fight women anymore. So, because they might kick their ass. So that's my whole thing on Khutulun. Cheers to you, Khutulun. In a time when women really had it rough over in the West, you're over in Mongolia showing them that you could be a total badass yourself. And you forged a reputation that has spanned over the better part of millennia. So, cheers to you. Thanks for listening, Hooter Thunkers. That's episode 100. The video version, probably won't do this too often. Wait till get an email from work and they're like, hey man, you can't just be uploading videos, but whatever. Thanks for listening and tune in next time.